Welcome to Elena, storyteller, a place where novels, love stories, social psychology, and timeless sayings are retold with deep emotions. Join Elena to listen, empathize, and embark on the emotional journey of today's story.
Now, Elena invites dear readers to listen to the novel amid the twists of life. Chapter 1: The Sunshine of California. California, the land hailed as the paradise of light, where the waves of the Pacific Ocean whisper day and night, where endless boulevards gleam under radiant sunlight, where vineyards and orange groves stretch all the way to the horizon. It was there that Ethan was born. He came into the world in a working-class family in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Their house was nothing remarkable, a one-story home, its white paint peeling with time, its red-tiled roof faded under the relentless sun. Yet to Ethan, it was the whole world, a place filled with laughter, hardship, and unfinished dreams. His father, David, was a construction worker. His calloused, sturdy hands were proof of the years spent battling with concrete, steel, and the scorching wind on work sites. Each evening, he would come home in clothes covered with cement dust, but his eyes always lit up when his children ran to greet him. His mother, Linda, was a gentle woman who worked part-time at a grocery store. Petite, with fragile shoulders yet extraordinary resilience, she was the heart of the family, the one who kept the small home warm with her quiet strength. Ethan's childhood was not lined with roses like that of many of his peers. While other children could freely play under California's golden sunlight, Ethan often had to help his parents with housework or look after his younger siblings. From an early age, he understood. If he wanted a better life, he would have to work twice as hard. He remembered clearly those summer mornings, when the sun had just risen above the horizon and golden light spilled into his small room. While his friends eagerly prepared to swim at Santa Monica Beach or play basketball at the park, Ethan would take his old bicycle and weave through the streets to deliver newspapers. Sometimes he worked extra hours at the local convenience store, cleaning shelves or loading groceries for customers. The money he earned was little, but to that teenage boy, it was a badge of pride, proof that he could contribute something, however small, to his family. Ethan's studies were also full of twists and turns. He was not the kind of student who always topped the class. Sometimes he achieved good results, filling his parents with joy. Other times, he stumbled and sank to the bottom of the grade sheet. Each time, shame and disappointment weighed heavily on him. One afternoon in 8th grade, Ethan brought home a math test with a grade of C. He hid the paper in his desk drawer, hoping his father would never find out. But David, with his perceptive eyes, noticed something unusual in his son's behavior. After dinner, he gently asked, "Ethan, did something happen at school today?" Ethan lowered his head, silent, his small hands clutching the hem of his pants. Finally, he whispered, I did badly on my test, Dad. I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." David looked at his son without anger. He simply placed his rough hand on Ethan's shoulder and said in a warm, steady voice, "Son, failure is not what you should fear. What's truly frightening is giving up. I don't need you to be better than anyone else. I just need you to never stop trying." Those words lit a fire in Ethan's heart. That night, lying in his small bed and staring at the old ceiling, tears rolled down his cheeks. In his mind, his father's words echoed, "Never stop trying." From that moment on, Ethan resolved never to let failure hold him back again. Alongside his father's firm yet loving guidance was his mother's tenderness. Linda often rose early to prepare breakfast before heading to the store. At night, though weary, she would sit with Ethan, helping him study. Once, when she found him fallen asleep at his desk, she only pulled a blanket over his shoulders and whispered softly, "Ethan, I believe in you." That quiet trust became a lasting source of strength for him. Ethan's childhood was also tied to the sea. Santa Monica was not far from his home. Whenever he found spare moments, he would sit alone on the sand, listening to the waves crash ashore. The sound of the surf, the cries of seagulls, and the fiery glow of the sunset over the water formed a boundless symphony. Sitting there, he often wondered, who will I become in this vast world? Will I be able to rise above my circumstances and live a life my parents can be proud of? While his friends dreamed of becoming singers, actors, or athletes basking in the spotlight, Ethan's dream was simpler. To one day build a stable life, ease his parents' burdens, and create a home filled with love. Though the path of learning was difficult, Ethan kept moving forward. He learned to find joy in the effort itself, rather than only in the results. Each time he scored poorly, he no longer wallowed in despair but instead told himself, "I'll do better next time." One day, after an important exam, Ethan was recognized in a small school ceremony. His parents came to watch. When his name was called, David clapped with all his strength, eyes glistening. Linda's smile shone like starlight. In that moment, Ethan felt his heart swell with strength. He knew then that every late night of studying, every exhausting part-time shift, all of it was worth it, as long as he could see that look of pride on his parents' faces. California, land of dazzling light, bore witness to Ethan's imperfect yet determined childhood. It was like a painting of two halves, one side glittering with the American dream, the other shadowed by sweat, tears, and sacrifice. Ethan grew up between those two shades, forged into someone resilient and strong, yet still full of hope and yearning. Little did he know that all those childhood years, those mornings on his bicycle delivering newspapers, those failed grades, those words of encouragement from his parents, those solitary sunsets by the sea, were silently preparing him. They were shaping the strength he would need later, when life's storms came crashing down. And so, Ethan's journey began with the sunshine of California, the first chapter of a life destined for trials, love, loss, and an unyielding will to rise again. Chapter 2, The College Years. That autumn, when the trees along Los Angeles boulevards turned golden, Ethan officially entered a new chapter of his life, college. He had been accepted into a mid-tier university in California. It was not the prestigious institution many aspired to, but for Ethan, it was a victory of his own. On the first day, he stood still at the school gates, holding his worn backpack, eyes fixed on the gleaming sign bearing the university's name. His heart pounded. Ethan knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he also knew this was his chance to break free from the cycle of hardship and move closer to his dream. A new life, full of challenges. From the very beginning, Ethan sensed the stark difference between college and high school. Here, no one cared who you were or where you came from. Everyone was busy chasing their own path. His classmates came from all walks of life. Some drove their own cars to school, some lived in well-equipped dorms. Ethan was different. He rented a cramped little room near campus, just big enough for a single bed, a desk, and a few shelves. To cover tuition and living expenses, Ethan worked part-time. By day, he attended classes. By night, he tied on an apron and waited tables at a small cafe. The wages were modest, but enough to pay rent and buy simple meals. Some nights, his shifts stretched past midnight. Exhausted, he would still force himself to open his books when he got home. He often reassured himself. There's no easy road, Ethan. If you want to reach your dream, you have to accept today's hardships. Sometimes, in the stillness of late nights, he sat alone at his desk under the dim glow of a lamp, dark circles beneath his eyes. He felt the weight of loneliness and pressure pressing down on him. But then he thought of his parents, his father's calloused hands, his mother's gentle smile, and strength returned to him. His first friends. In class, Ethan was not the one who stood out. Quiet, he usually sat in the back, attentively listening. Yet it was precisely this humility and sincerity that drew a few classmates to notice him. One of them was Daniel, a tall, lively young man with a passion for basketball. On the first day, seeing Ethan fumbling to find a classroom, Daniel walked up, patted his shoulder, and said with a grin, "Hey, you lost too. This place is huge. I was the same on my first day. Come on, I'll show you." From that day, they became friends. Daniel was nothing like Ethan. He came from a well-off family, yet he was neither arrogant nor dismissive. He often invited Ethan to basketball games or to grab burgers after class. Though Ethan usually declined because of his shifts, Daniel never complained. Sometimes, he even dropped by the cafe where Ethan worked just to support him. Then there was Mia, a Mexican-American girl in the same major. Bright, quick-witted, and brimming with energy, she often sat beside Ethan. During lectures, she would lean over and whisper, "Ethan, your notes are so thorough. I bet you'll end up being a strict professor one day." Her teasing made Ethan laugh, easing some of his weariness. Pressure and faith. Despite having friends, Ethan's college life remained a steep climb. Some exam seasons arrived before he'd had the chance to review properly, overloaded by work shifts. More than once, he pulled all-nighters, fueled only by coffee. Results weren't always kind. Once, he received an F in microeconomics. Staring at the grade, his chest tightened with despair. He questioned whether he truly belonged on this path. That evening, he called home. His mother's warm voice flowed through the phone. "Son, don't worry too much. Failure is just part of life. What matters is whether you gave it your best. Your father and I will always believe in you." Hearing this, Ethan fell silent, tears sliding down his cheeks. In that moment, he realized, even if the whole world doubted him, as long as his parents believed, it was enough for him to keep going. Moments of peace. Amid the bustle of school and work, Ethan still carved out small oases of calm. Sometimes, after finishing a late shift, he rode his bike to the beach near campus. Sitting on the sand, listening to the waves whisper, he felt his spirit cleansed. He remembered his childhood, those evenings watching the sunset at Santa Monica. The sea remained the one place that gave him peace. Occasionally, Daniel and Mia joined him. They sat together, sharing dreams and worries about the future. Daniel longed to be a professional basketball player. Mia dreamed of starting her own company. When it was Ethan's turn, he simply said softly, "I just want a steady job, so I can take care of my parents and my family." They laughed, calling him the practical guy, but in their eyes was quiet admiration. A small turning point. By the end of his sophomore year, Ethan caught the attention of one professor who admired his diligence. The professor invited him to join a small research project. For the first time, Ethan felt genuine recognition from a teacher. Despite his busy schedule, he accepted, spending weekends working late with the research team. The project itself was modest, but the experience taught him invaluable lessons. When he stood before the class to present, catching the proud look in his professor's eyes and the respect of his peers, Ethan knew that no effort was ever wasted. Closing a chapter. Ethan's college years were a blend of tears and laughter, of pressure and hope. He had learned that life was never fair, but it was perseverance and resolve that determined how far one could go. As graduation approached, Ethan sat alone in his tiny room, the window open to the night sky. He thought back on his journey, the long, exhausting shifts, the failed courses, the loyal friends who stood by him. All of it had seeped into his being, shaping the person he had become. Smiling to himself, he whispered, "Tomorrow will be harder still, but I'm ready. As long as I don't give up, I'll find my path." And so, Ethan stepped into a new chapter of his life, carrying with him the faith and resilience forged in those arduous but unforgettable college years. Chapter 3: The Struggling Days. David stepped into a new chapter of his life when he officially became a college student. That very first morning on campus, he felt as though he had wandered into another world. Ancient moss-covered buildings stood side by side with sleek modern constructions, lush green lawns where students lay reading or strumming guitars, and an atmosphere vibrant and youthful, like a melody brimming with life. David took a deep breath, his heart filled with excitement, though underneath it lingered a shadow of worry. He knew well, setting foot in the lecture hall was only the beginning. The path to completing 4 years of college would not be easy, especially since his family was far from wealthy. His parents had worked tirelessly to give him a foothold in life. David had no desire to add to their burdens, so from the very start, he resolved to study while working part-time. Life as a poor student. In the early days, his schedule was packed with classes, yet David managed to find a part-time job at a small cafe near campus. By day, he was a student like any other, sitting in class, attentively listening and taking notes. By afternoon, he donned an apron, rushing about to serve drinks, clean tables, and attend to customers. At night, when the streets grew quiet, he would return to his cramped dorm room, sit at the old desk, and study late into the night. There were nights when long shifts left his legs aching from constant running back and forth. He returned home drenched in the smell of coffee and pastries, but the moment he sat down, he had to open his books again. More than once, his eyelids grew heavy, his head dropped onto the notebook, and he drifted into a shallow sleep amid the scent of paper and the faint clacking of unfinished keystrokes. The next morning, waking with a stiff back, David would simply give a wry smile and whisper to himself, "Everything will be fine. Just hold on a little longer. You can't give up now." That fragile faith was what kept him moving forward day by day. Moments of failure. Despite his best efforts, David could not avoid setbacks. Once, he failed an important class because he had been too busy working shifts to properly review. Holding the exam results in his hand, his heart ached. That day, he sat silently at his favorite cafe, watching the crowd pass by outside the window, his soul hollow. "I tried so hard, why is it still not enough?" he asked himself. That night, he scribbled a few words on a scrap of paper and taped it above his desk. Every fall is a chance to rise stronger. He decided not to let failure extinguish his dream. From then on, David learned to manage his time more wisely, cutting back shifts during exam weeks, dedicating evenings solely to study, and paying extra attention in class to reduce self-study later. He realized success was not only about working hard, but also about being smart in arranging one's life. Cherished moments. Still, college life was not all hardship. Amid the endless bustle, David collected many precious memories. On weekend afternoons, he and his friends sprawled on the campus lawn, guitars ringing beneath the golden sunset, their laughter echoing like the anthem of youth. Sometimes they pooled money to buy ingredients and cook in a small apartment. The dishes were often burnt or too salty, yet they laughed heartily, calling it their friendship specialty. In the summer of his sophomore year, David joined a volunteer trip to a poor rural community on the outskirts of California. Together with his friends, he taught English to immigrant children. Their bright eyes, eager as they spelled out each letter, touched him so deeply that tears welled up. On the final night there, David sat on the porch, listening to the chirping of insects, and wrote in his journal, "No matter how hard life gets, I must finish my studies, not just for myself, but for those who need me." It was then he realized that knowledge was not merely a key for personal success. It could also unlock futures for others. Graduation day. Time flew swiftly, and 4 years of college came to an end. On graduation day, David wore the black gown and square cap, his hands trembling as he held his diploma. Flags waved, music blared, and cheers filled the square, yet within him surged a tide of emotions. He thought of sleepless nights hunched over his books, of hurried meals, of tears shed over grades, and of the small but powerful moments that had kept him going. His parents were there that day. As David handed the diploma to his father, the man silently placed a hand on his shoulder, his eyes shimmering with pride. No words were needed. David understood that every sacrifice had been worth it. He smiled and silently promised himself, "This is only the beginning. The road ahead is long, but I am ready to walk it." What David didn't know was that the greatest trials of his life lay not in classrooms or exams, but ahead, where love, marriage, and destiny would test his heart more than ever before. Chapter 4. A Fateful Encounter. The summer of 2016 bathed California in honey-golden sunlight. The streets where David lived were always bustling with people, yet for him, that season felt strangely hazy. After graduation, he had returned to his parents' modest home. In those months of juggling part-time jobs, ranging from office work to marketing, even dabbling in freelance gigs online, David often asked himself, "Where do I truly belong? Where is my future heading?" And just as his soul drifted aimlessly at the crossroads, fate quietly placed a new punctuation mark in his life, one spelled with the name Emily. The first meeting. One June afternoon, David went to the neighborhood park for a run. California's summer had its own charm. The sunlight never too harsh, the breeze cool and refreshing, the park alive with people exercising, walking dogs, or simply reading on benches. As he passed by an old oak tree, David slowed his pace. On a wooden bench beneath the shade sat a young woman. Her long brown hair flowed down, her delicate face bent over a book, her lips occasionally curling into a faint smile as if the story had drawn her into its secret world. For a fleeting moment, David felt as though time itself had slowed. Just then, one of her white earbuds slipped and fell to the ground. David quickly picked it up and handed it back. "Here you go," he said politely. "Oh, thank you." Emily looked up. Her blue eyes flashed with surprise, followed by a gentle smile. It lasted only a few seconds, yet in David's heart stirred a peculiar feeling, warm yet restless. He resumed his jog, but his steps felt weightless. Their first conversations. A few days later, when David returned to the park, he saw Emily again. She was in the same spot, the same book in hand, her calm presence standing out amidst the noise around her. This time, David summoned his courage and sat down on a bench a comfortable distance away. Pointing to her book, he said, "You're reading The Great Gatsby. I studied that back in college." "Really?" Emily smiled. "I picked it up out of curiosity, but the more I read, the more captivating it becomes. What did you think of it?" That small exchange opened a door. Soon, they were discussing characters, the roaring 20s in America, and before long, their conversation drifted toward music, food, and youthful dreams. Emily loved soft jazz, while David was passionate about classic rock. They debated, disagreed, then laughed at how their differences made everything even more interesting. From that day forward, the park was no longer just a jogging route for David. It became an unspoken meeting place. He knew that if he passed by that bench, a smile would be waiting for him. Blossoming love. Time passed, and David and Emily began seeing each other more often. What started as passing conversations turned into coffee dates, and then into long evening walks along lamplit streets. Emily told David about her job at a fashion store and her dream of opening a small boutique to sell clothes she designed herself. David, in turn, shared stories of his difficult college years, the exhausting shifts he had endured, and the stubborn persistence that kept him going. One evening, they went to the beach together. The waves roared, the salty breeze filled the air. Sitting side by side on the sand, they stayed silent for a long while, letting nature fill the quiet. Then Emily softly asked, "Do you believe in fate?" David turned to her, his eyes steady. "I didn't before, but since meeting you, I think I'm starting to." Emily smiled, her cheeks glowing pink under the moonlight. In that instant, both knew their hearts had found each other. Family and acceptance. As their relationship deepened, Emily often visited David's home. She helped his mother prepare dinner and chatted with his father about old memories. The house, once quiet, suddenly felt brighter and warmer with her presence. Likewise, whenever David visited Emily's home, he was welcomed. Her parents did not object to their relationship. They saw in David a hardworking, respectful young man, someone without a stable career yet, but with clear responsibility and ambition. David was overjoyed. After years of hardship, he felt that at last, he had found the person to walk beside him for life. On sleepless nights, he often pictured a small home where he and Emily would raise children, the sound of laughter replacing the loneliness that had once haunted him. The gathering storm. But just when their love ripened into its sweetest season, shadows began to creep in. Challenges awaited them, not only from the struggles of life, but also from traditions, prejudices, and unforeseen circumstances. David had no idea that soon, their love would be tested to its very limits. The path that seemed paved with roses would suddenly turn into a thorn-filled crossroads, forcing them to make choices they would carry for the rest of their lives. Chapter 5. Upheaval and Loss. The first days with Emily were the sweetest David had ever known. Their love was not flamboyant or loud, but warm and full of life. David worked harder than ever, not just for himself, but to prepare for a stable future for the two of them. He believed it would not be long before he and Emily would share the same roof as husband and wife. Then, fate struck without warning. Unexpected news. One afternoon, Emily asked David to meet her at their usual park. She sat quietly on the wooden bench, fingers interlaced, her face shadowed with worry. Even before reaching her, David sensed something was wrong. "Emily, what's the matter?" he asked softly. Emily drew a deep breath, her voice trembling. "David, I'm pregnant." The world around him seemed to freeze. The rustle of leaves, the laughter of children, the hum of cars all faded into the distance. Inside David surged a storm of emotions, shock, anxiety, and a faint, unformed joy. He took her hand, looking deep into her eyes. "Are you scared?" "Yes, I'm worried about so many things. I'm afraid my family won't accept this. I worry about my job, about the future. But more than anything, I'm afraid of losing you." David squeezed her hand firmly, his gaze unwavering. "I will never leave you. This is our child, and I will take responsibility. You are not alone." At that, Emily broke down in tears. They streamed down her cheeks, but they were tears of comfort. Joy mixed with burden. The news of the baby filled them with both happiness and worry. David quickly shared it with his parents. His mother wept, partly with joy, partly with concern. His father stayed silent for a long while, then laid a steady hand on his son's shoulder, his voice grave. "You've truly become a man now, David. This is responsibility, and it is also a trial. Be strong. Do not let Emily and the child suffer." David nodded, determination rising within him. He began to plan more carefully. He needed stable work, a wedding, and to learn how to be a father. The road ahead was not easy, but he was ready. Emily's family, however, reacted more harshly. To them, having a child before marriage was unacceptable. Yet after many difficult conversations, seeing David's seriousness, they gradually softened. Finally, both families agreed to move up the wedding to legitimize the union. During the preparations, David and Emily lived in a whirlwind of nerves and joy. Whenever David glanced at Emily's still flat stomach, he imagined the day he would hear their baby's first cry. In his mind's eye rose a vision: a small home, Emily smiling in the kitchen, and himself playing with their child. He believed happiness was finally within reach. A sudden shock. But then another blow struck like a sudden storm. It was a late autumn morning, golden leaves scattered across the yard. David's father entered his room, eyes red. He hesitated, his voice choked. "David, your grandmother has passed away." David froze, his heart clenched as if in a vice. His grandmother had been a pillar of his childhood, the one who told him old stories, who quietly gave him boundless love. And now she was gone forever. Before his grief could settle, another burden arose. According to family tradition, a wedding could not be held within a year of a grandparent passing, as a sign of filial piety. For David's parents, this rule was non-negotiable. David was torn. On one side stood family tradition, on the other, his love and responsibility toward Emily. He tried to explain to Emily's family, hoping for understanding, but her parents refused. "We cannot allow our daughter and grandchild to endure an uncertain, indefinite wait," her father declared firmly. Emily sat silently beside them, tears streaming down her cheeks. David looked at her, his heart breaking. He knew she was caught between two worlds, and he was powerless to bridge the chasm between love and tradition. Collapse. In the end, the conflict reached its peak. Emily's family decided to cancel the wedding. Even with a child growing inside her, the divide could not be healed. David crumbled. It felt as though his world collapsed before his eyes. His grandmother gone, his wedding shattered, the woman he loved slipping away. He plunged into the darkest despair of his life, each day consumed by regret and sorrow. He still visited Emily and the baby, but the distance between them widened. It wasn't that their love had died, only that the rift was too deep to mend. Emily drifted further from him until, one day, she chose another path, leaving David with a wound that would never fully heal. Darkness descends. The months that followed were empty shadows. David worked like a machine, returning home only to sit in silence for hours. At night, he lay staring at the ceiling, whispering to himself. If only I had done something differently. If only I had been strong enough to keep Emily by my side. But life holds no room for if only. Reality marched on, indifferent, leaving him with an irreparable loss. David had entered the darkest chapter of his life, a place where love, hope, and even faith in the future lay buried beneath the ashes of tragedy. Chapter 6: The Years Lost in Darkness. After the broken wedding, David felt like a ship thrown off course by a violent storm. Everything he had once trusted and cherished seemed to collapse within a short span of time. His grandmother's passing, the canceled wedding, and the fracture of his love. And the most unbearable solitude of all came when he realized that Emily, the woman he once promised to walk with until the end, had chosen to leave, leaving behind an emptiness for him and their child that could never be filled. The first days of despair. David lived as though his soul had been hollowed out. Each morning he woke without a single reason to leave his bed. Each long night he sat alone in a darkened room, watching the streetlight glow through the window, as though the light outside no longer belonged to his world. Friends came to visit, offering words of comfort and encouragement, but he answered only with a forced smile. The moment the door closed, he returned to silence, to endless sighs. He avoided gatherings, declined invitations from colleagues, and cut himself off from nearly everyone he had once been close to. Inside his heart, only one question echoed relentlessly. Why did everything fall apart at once? Why couldn't I hold on to anything? The weight of responsibility. Though David kept working, his passion was gone. He worked merely to avoid starvation, to earn the bare minimum. Yet every thought of his child pierced him with guilt. Emily had one custody. She cared for the baby with the devotion of a loving mother, and David knew she was doing well. But he could not shake the crushing sense of helplessness each time he stood from afar, unable to fulfill his role as a father. On some nights, he would quietly walk to the house where Emily lived. From across the street, he stared at the warm glow spilling from her window, imagining his child asleep safely in her arms. Many times he wanted to knock on the door to see his child, to hold the little one close. But each time he turned away, afraid his presence would only complicate matters further. Those were the moments that tore his heart apart. He felt like an outsider in his own life, shut out from the happiness that should have been his. Years of emptiness. 3 years passed after the tragedy, and David lived like a shadow. He drifted through different jobs, never settling, never feeling a sense of purpose. Ambition and dreams of success had long withered away. Sometimes friends would ask, "David, do you have any plans for the future?" He would only shrug and answer flatly, "The future, I can't think that far ahead." Time no longer passed in years or months for him. It was only an endless pile of days, stacked one on top of another, heavy and meaningless. The nightmares. At night, David was haunted by dreams. In them, he was always running down a dark road. Ahead of him, he could see Emily holding their child. He ran with all his strength, but his legs felt leaden, and they grew smaller and smaller in the distance. Finally, he fell, crying out into the darkness, yet no one heard him. Many nights he awoke drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. He would sip water, glance at the clock showing 3 a.m., and then sit in silence until dawn broke. Loneliness gnawed at him, piece by piece. A fragile anchor. The only thing that kept David from collapsing entirely was the memory of his grandmother. In his mind, she was still present, gentle, patient, and endlessly kind. Whenever he was on the verge of surrendering, he remembered her words. "David, life may try to drown you, but if you can still stand, no storm will last forever." Those words kept him from choosing the darkest path. He knew that no matter how deep his suffering, he was not allowed to give up. A faint light. 3 years in darkness slowly dulled his wounds. The pain never vanished, but David began to accept it. He started attending community support groups on family and marriage. At first, he sat silently, listening. But as he heard others share, those who had lost husbands, wives, or endured broken marriages, he realized he was not alone. One evening, for the first time in years, he stood up to tell his story. His voice trembled, But as he poured out the burden he had carried for so long, he felt a weight lift. The applause from those who understood was like a fresh wind blowing through his weary soul. David began writing in a journal, recording emotions, memories, and the painful lessons he had endured. Writing became his way of conversing with himself, a medicine that slowly healed his wounded spirit. The beginning of renewal. Gradually, David learned to step out of the shadows. He began to take work more seriously, enrolling in courses to sharpen his skills. He took up exercise, jogging each morning. Most importantly, he allowed himself to open up again, no longer shutting out every new connection. He still remembered Emily. He still felt a sharp ache when thinking of the child he could not raise. But the pain no longer chained him down. Instead, it became part of his story, a reminder that while life could be merciless, he still had the choice to rise and continue forward. David had begun to glimpse the light at the end of the tunnel. It was not yet perfect happiness, but it was the fragile beginning of a new chapter in his life. Chapter 7. Stepping back into the light. 3 years in darkness had left deep scars on David, but they had also forged in him a resilience he never thought he possessed. He was no longer the dreamy young man he once had been. He was now someone who had fallen, lost much, but also learned how to rise again from the ruins. It was then that fate stepped into his life once more, bringing him an unexpected chance to reclaim the light he thought he had lost forever. A fateful encounter. One spring morning, David attended a career skills workshop at the local community center. He had no great expectations, just thought it might be a way to expand his network and perhaps find some small spark of inspiration for work. During the coffee break, he fumbled awkwardly with a paper cup that was nearly spilling over. A cheerful voice came from behind him. "Here, let me help you. You're about to spill it everywhere." David turned around. Standing before him was a young woman with neatly tied brown hair and bright, lively eyes. She smiled warmly as she steadied his cup and poured the coffee without spilling a drop. "Thank you, I'm a bit clumsy," David said, embarrassed. "It's fine, I'm Anna," she replied, extending her hand. "David," he answered, shaking her hand and feeling an odd, comforting warmth. Their first conversation was simple, about work, the workshop, and little snippets of daily life. Yet David realized it had been a very long time since he had laughed so freely in front of someone new. The meetings that followed. After the workshop, David and Anna stayed in touch through email, then texting, and soon began meeting more often. Anna was a mature woman who had weathered her own hardships. Because of that, she was never in a rush, never loud or demanding, but patient and attentive whenever David opened up. One day, he told her everything, about his past, about Emily, and about the child he could not raise by his side. When he finished, Anna's eyes held no trace of judgment. Instead, she gently placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You've endured more than most people ever could, but I believe that's what has made you stronger. The past can't be changed, David, but the future, it's still waiting for you." The words were simple, but they pierced straight to his heart. For the first time in years, David felt he was no longer alone. Light returns. Anna's presence was like a fresh breeze drifting into his weary life. She encouraged him to revisit old passions, reading, photography, and especially writing. At her urging, he began posting his journal entries on a small blog. To his surprise, his reflections on resilience, love, and loss resonated with many readers. Anna was not only a companion, but also the spark that helped David find the courage to live again. He threw himself more fully into his work, committed to a long-term role at a tech company, and eventually earned a promotion. One afternoon, as they sat together in their usual cafe, David turned to her and said, "Anna, it's been so long since I felt truly alive. I don't feel like a failure anymore. You've helped me find the light again." Anna smiled, her eyes glistening. "I didn't save you, David. You saved yourself. I just walked beside you to remind you that you deserve happiness." A new love. Their love grew slowly, naturally, but deeply. If his love with Emily had once been a blazing fire, Then his love with Anna was a steady flame, quiet, enduring, and warm enough to thaw a heart long frozen. This time, David knew he could not let it slip away. He learned patience, he learned to listen, and he learned to balance love with responsibility. Every time he saw Anna smile, he silently thanked life for granting him a second chance. The big decision. After nearly 2 years together, David decided to propose. He chose not a grand or glamorous place, but the park where they had first met, at sunset. Holding her hand, he looked into her eyes. "I once thought I had lost everything, that my heart could never come back to life. But then I met you. Anna, you brought me back, gave me faith that I still deserve love and happiness. Will you walk with me until the end of the road?" Tears welled up in Anna's eyes as she nodded, whispering softly, "Yes, David, I will." In that moment, David knew for certain. The darkness had finally receded. Life might bring storms, but the light had always been there, waiting for those who dared to seek it. A new beginning. Their wedding was not lavish, but it was filled with warmth. Friends, colleagues, and loved ones gathered to celebrate. When David saw Anna in her simple yet radiant dress, he knew he had truly found his home. Emily also came that day, with their child. They were not there to reopen old wounds, but to give their blessing to a new beginning. David bent down, embraced his son, and whispered silently in his heart, "My boy, even if I can't always be by your side, I've never stopped loving you. Today I begin again so I can be a better father for you." As the celebration drew to a close, David held Anna's hand tightly, his heart brimming with peace. After years of darkness, he had finally stepped forward into the light. Chapter 8, A Home of Happiness. David's life turned a brand new page after he and Anna officially became husband and wife. The wedding was not extravagant or lavish, yet to David, it was the most important day of his life. The day he truly felt that the shadows of his past had finally closed, and the light of a new family home was opening before him. A small house, a great joy. After the wedding, David and Anna moved into a modest home on the outskirts of California. The house was neither spacious nor luxurious, but it was filled with warmth. Every morning, David awoke to the aroma of coffee Anna brewed in the kitchen. Every evening after work, he saw her waiting with a smile by the porch. David had once thought happiness could only be measured by wealth, career advancement, and material abundance. But living with Anna taught him otherwise. Happiness, he realized, was sometimes just a small house, a woman willing to hold his hand through life's trials, and a simple meal shared with laughter. Anna brought peace. David offered protection. They complemented one another, filling in the gaps that past wounds had left behind. New challenges. But marriage was not always painted in rosy hues. Even in the first year, they faced new challenges. David became increasingly busy at his technology company, where he had just been promoted to project manager. The pressure weighed heavily, often keeping him late at the office, and many nights he carried work home. Meanwhile, Anna was still pursuing her master's degree while working part-time to support their household. There were evenings when they barely spoke to each other. The little house grew uncomfortably quiet, and David feared an invisible distance was creeping between them. One night, during an argument about finances, David lost his temper and said hurtful words. Anna fell silent, then retreated into the bedroom, leaving him alone in the cold living room. That night, he could not sleep. His mind drifted back to his past with Emily, a love that had crumbled because neither of them could overcome their struggles together. He feared history might repeat itself. The next morning, as Anna was about to leave for school, David took her hand and said with heartfelt honesty, "I'm sorry, I let the pressure get the better of me, but I don't want us to repeat the same mistakes as before. I need you, Anna. I want us to face everything together, no matter how difficult it gets." Anna was silent for a moment, then gave him a gentle smile. "I feel the same, David. I just need to know that you'll always be here and that neither of us will let go." In that moment, they held each other's hands tightly. They understood that marriage was not only about love, it was also about patience, listening, and compromise. The the joy of fatherhood again. A year after their wedding, Anna became pregnant. The news overwhelmed David with joy. He had once known the feeling of being a father, but back then it was filled with pain because he couldn't be present for his child. This time, knowing he would truly be there, he felt both elated and nervous. He cared for Anna in every possible way, waking early to prepare breakfast, accompanying her to prenatal checkups, even buying tiny outfits for the baby on the way. Each night, he placed his hand on her belly, listening to the small movements and faint heartbeat, his heart brimming with indescribable happiness. "My child, Daddy is here. This time I won't let you grow up without my love," David whispered every night. On the day the baby was born, David waited anxiously outside the delivery room, his heart pounding. When he heard the first cry, he broke down in tears. Holding the newborn in his arms, he felt his entire life had been healed. The little boy was named Lucas, meaning light. To David and Anna, Lucas was their new light, a symbol of their journey from darkness into brightness. Past and present. On the day of Lucas's 1-month celebration, Emily came to visit, bringing along David's older son. The reunion was filled with emotion. Watching David cradle Lucas, Emily smiled softly. "I'm happy for you, truly. You found the happiness you always deserved." David lowered his head, his voice steady but warm. "Thank you, Emily. The past left us with pain, but it also taught me valuable lessons. Now, I just hope that both of us can live happily so that our children grow up surrounded by love." At that moment, his older son ran into his arms. David bent down and embraced both children tightly. He realized that though life had taken many turns, happiness had finally arrived for those who waited patiently and had the strength to keep moving forward. The meaning of happiness. David understood now that happiness was not a flawless life free of trials and losses. True happiness was appreciating what you had, learning to rise after each fall, and never letting go of the ones you love. Sitting in their small house, watching Anna smile at the dining table, hearing Lucas cry for milk, and seeing his older son playing in the yard, David smiled quietly. His heart whispered, "At last I found my true home. This is what I've longed for my entire life." Chapter 9. Lessons to leave behind for tomorrow. That night, when everyone in the house had drifted into sleep, David sat alone at his desk. The soft yellow glow of the lamp spilled across the blank page before him, quietly bearing witness to the flood of thoughts stirring in his mind. Life had carried him through countless upheavals, and now that peace had finally returned, he felt compelled to write, not only for himself, but also as a message to future generations, to those walking the path of love and marriage. He recalled his childhood in sunlit California, years of innocence when everything was simple and bright. Then came youth with its unexpected challenges. As a student, balancing study and work often left him exhausted, yet he endured. Love entered his life, sweet but fragile, and from that very love, his journey veered down a road filled with both pain and regret. David wrote slowly, "Love is not just a feeling. It is a choice, a promise. When you love someone, do not love only in moments of joy, but also through times of hardship and storm. Hold on to each other, because if you let go, what remains is only pain." He paused, exhaling softly. The memory of Sophia emerged, the woman who had once set his heart ablaze, the one with whom he dreamed of a shared home. Yet because of pressures, traditions, and irreconcilable differences, they had not walked the whole journey together. He had once blamed her, once cursed fate. But looking back, he now understood. They had simply been two young souls, not yet mature enough to hold on to each other through life's storms. "Marriage is not only for two who are in love," he continued to write, "but for two souls that have matured, ready to sacrifice for one another, ready to endure, and willing to keep walking together no matter how fierce the storm." The pain of a broken marriage had once cast David into darkness. He had known despair, known what it was to endure endless nights. Yet from that abyss, he had learned how to rise again. And when Emily entered his life, he realized, happiness is never truly lost. It sometimes arrives late, in a different form, but gentler, fuller, and more enduring. He wrote, "Family is the place where storms stop at the door. It is where, no matter how harsh the world outside may be, you are loved unconditionally. Cherish the partner who stands beside you. Love your children with all your heart, for they are the most precious gift life can give. A tear fell onto the page, but this time it was not born of sorrow, it was a tear of gratitude. He was grateful for a past that had taught him resilience. Grateful to Sophia for the lessons of love. Grateful to Emily for healing his heart. And above all, grateful that life had not abandoned him, allowing him to write these words tonight. Closing the notebook, David smiled gently. Outside, the night had grown deep, but within him, a new dawn quietly began to rise. He whispered to himself, "If one day my son reads these words, I want him to remember this. Love is not a fleeting feeling, but a long journey. Cherish it, protect it, and never let go while your heart still longs to stay." And so, the story of his life closed with one simple, yet profound lesson. No matter how many trials one endures, love, marriage, and family will always be the final harbor, the place where peace is found, the eternal value that can never be replaced.
Thank you so much for watching until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to support Elena, storyteller, and stay tuned for the next heartfelt video.